Okay, so we're doing chapter 7 today. I know the screen says chapter 9, but this is really, in our book, it's chapter 7. So we're continuing with the flow of food. And today we're going to talk about serving the food. So first we're going to go over a review of holding the food. That's going to be after we cook the food, we need to hold it at a safe temperature. So make sure the staff are monitoring your holding temperatures on a regular basis. If you check your temperatures every 2 hours, you have time to correct your temperatures. So if something fell down below 135 while you're holding it for a buffet, or actually while it's on a buffet, you can take it back and heat it up again. And you can still serve it. But after 4 hours, if you check the temperature, you've got to hang the, you got to throw that food away. Okay. Masks need to be up and over the nose, please. Masks, please. Thank you. So you check the temperature at least every 4 hours. Anything that is in the temperature danger zone, it would be thrown out. Okay. When it comes time to reheating food, we don't ever use hot holding equipment to reheat food unless it is built to do so. So if you have something like a crock pot, that can hold hot food hot, but it's not going to be able to reheat food fast enough to get it to the correct temperature. So you have to reheat the food correctly first. And did we talk about how we reheat the food, what temperature we reheat the food? Yes. If you're going to have it holding it for service, you have to reheat food up to 165 degrees. Okay, if you're holding food on the buffet, you're going to make sure that the food is covered. Have sneeze guards and the food covers, so like a lid over each container of food. That helps keep the food from being contaminated, and it helps hold it at the correct temperature. Policies, create them about how long the operation will hold food and when it will be thrown out. If you're running a buffet, you really don't want that same pan of food sitting there for 4 hours. If you have food that's sitting around that long, you have to keep throwing it away, you should probably change your menu. Okay. We can also hold food without temperature control in certain cases. So cold food, things like potato salad, maybe some custards, things like that that you normally would serve cold. You can hold it without temperature control for up to 6 hours, as long as it was below 41 degrees when you took it out of the fridge. It has to have a label on it saying what time it was removed from refrigeration and the time that it needs to be thrown out. We also have to make sure that it doesn't go above 70 degrees in that 6 hour period. So if we are having a picnic today outside, taking cold food that's TCS food out there, we may or may not be able to get away with keeping it below 70 degrees if we don't have any type of a thermal insulated equipment to hold it. If it goes above 70 degrees, then we're going to have to throw that cold food out. And then we have to have that sold, served, and thrown out within 6 hours. Similar, we can have hot food, hot TCS food, as long as it was 135 degrees or warmer before we move it from an oven or a holding cabinet. Has to have a label specifying when the item can be thrown out or must be thrown out. And then is sold, served, or thrown out within 4 hours. So we only have 4 hours that we can hold hot food without temperature control. So why do we have longer for the cold food than we do for hot food? Okay, so in the upper portion of the danger zone from 70 to 125, bacteria grows even faster than it does when it's below 70 degrees. So we can keep the colder food out longer because it's not as dangerous. But that warm food that's cooling off, that's going to be much more dangerous. So we limit that time for 4 hours. If you're going to be doing this, you have to have written approvals. You're going to need to get regulatory approval, get written approval in advance. You need to maintain your procedures, have written documents for keeping track of the temperatures, and then make those procedures available. If you're a server, you have to know how to handle plates, dishes, glasses, and food correctly. So when you serve a plate of food, you have your hand underneath the plate. You don't have your thumb on the rim of the plate where you could contaminate the eating surface. If you're carrying glasses, we have racks that those are designed to go into. Instead of carrying glassware that's stacked together, where if it slips, you can end up with a lot of broken glass. Tableware, you touch it by the handle instead of by the tines of the fork or the bowl of the soup, or not the soup, but the spoon. You don't want to be touching the part that goes into the guest's mouth. Ready to eat food, we'll handle that with tongs, belly paper, or single-use gloves. Don't handle it with your bare hands. And then when you need to get ice, you have to do this scoop at the ice machine. And we would never use our hands to grab ice and put it into a glass, or even worse, use a glass and scoop it into the ice machine. Okay. If you preset tableware, and a lot of restaurants do this, you'll come down, sit down at a table, and all of the tableware and glasses are there already. It's recommended to wrap or cover the items to prevent contamination. So oftentimes you'll see them wrapped in a paper or a cloth napkin. But you don't have to wrap them if the extra settings that are at the table are removed when the guests are seated, or they're removed at the end of the meal, and they're cleaned and sanitized. Things that we don't reserve, food returned by a guest. So somebody may have cut into their steak, they saw that it was overcooked or undercooked, and they're sending it back. You can't give, if it's overcooked, you can't give it to another guest who ordered a well-done steak. If it is undercooked, you can recook it for that same guest. Uncovered condiments. So some places will put out small bowls or ramekins of ketchup, mustard, mayonnaise. If they don't use them, you can't take them and give them to another guest because they were uncovered. Same thing with bread. If you get a basket of bread, and even if the guest didn't touch it, you can't take it and serve it to another guest. And then plate garnishes, things like a little wedge of lemon or parsley, rosemary spread. You can't reuse those on another plate. Most people don't eat them or use them, but you still can't take them and put them on another plate. So the other thing that we can put back out on the table is like individually wrapped condiment packets. So the portion control packets of like ketchup, mustard, mayonnaise, those can go out. The little paper containers of salt and pepper, or crackers that are wrapped up and in a basket, like those things can go out as long as they're in good condition. They don't have stains on them. The papers aren't ripped. Okay, so kitchen guidelines for serving food. So when you're doing plate up in a kitchen, you have to avoid bare hand contact with ready to eat food. The food you're putting on the plate, yes, sure. The food that you're putting on the plate, you need to be wearing gloves whenever you're doing the plate up, or at least spatulas, tongs, deli sheets, or some other type of utensil. Get that food out of its cooking container and onto the plate. Gonna make sure that your utensils are cleaned and sanitized. And you want separate utensils for each food. So you don't want to be taking, like if you have two different types of vegetables, you don't want to be scooping broccoli out of one bowl or container and then cauliflower out of another container with the same spoon. If you are using them continuously, those utensils need to be cleaned and sanitized at least every 4 hours. Store the serving utensils correctly between uses. So you can leave them in the food, just like if you were at a buffet, you would leave the serving spoon or utensil in the container of the food, making sure that the handle is extended above the rim. You can place them also on a clean and sanitized food contact surface. So sometimes there will be a clean plate in front of the hotel pan of the food. Optionally, you can store spoons or scoops under running water that is at least 135 degrees. That's very, very hot water. Take-home containers. Some operations have take-home containers that are reusable. You can only have them refilled when they are, in fact, reusable. They're provided to the guest by the operation, and that they have been cleaned and sanitized correctly. So I think the cafeteria and the student union offers a service like this where you can go get your food in your go container and then take it home and eat it. And then you hold on to that container. But I think it's up to you to wash and sanitize it. Beverage containers can be refilled if the beverage is not a TCS food. So what kind of a beverage would be a TCS food? Okay, milk for sure. Milkshakes, anything with that kind of a ingredient in it. Um, these take-home containers have to be refilled for the same guest. It's in a container that can be correctly and effectively cleaned. It's rinsed with fresh hot water under pressure before it's refilled. And the container is refilled by staff that work for the operation or by the individual guest using a process that prevents contamination. So you want to be sure that however people can get their refill, that if their cup is not cleaned and sanitized, it's not capable of contaminating the equipment that you have in your operation. So preventing contamination in self-service areas. We talked about using sneeze guards. So people can still see what the food is, but they have a more difficult time coughing or sneezing onto the food. Use labels to identify the food items so that everyone knows exactly what you are serving. Keep raw meat, fish, and poultry separate from ready-to-eat foods. You ever been to a buffet where there's raw meat, seafood, or poultry? We have, let me not have that in here. There's something called a Mongolian barbecue where they have the trays of meat under a sneeze guard. You get to like put the meat that you want on your platter, and then you give it to the chef, and they have a big hot, either a wok or a flat top, where they can cook your meat on it and then serve it back to you. At the self-service buffets, do not let customers refill dirty plates or use dirty utensils at the self-service areas. So you definitely do not let them take a dirty plate up. And even more definitely, don't let them take their fork or spoon up and use it as a serving utensil that they're going to put in and contaminate the rest of your food. Stock the displays with the correct utensils. So when you're using soup, you want to have ladles available for the soup. And then either tongs or spatulas or serving spoons, depending on what the other foods are. Include the manufacturer or processing label provided with the food. A label is not needed for bulk unpackaged food, such as bakery products, if that product makes no claim regarding health and nutrient content. So you don't need to label like your dinner rolls unless you're saying that they are gluten-free dinner rolls or they're low sugar dinner rolls. You might live in a location that there are not laws on the books requiring the food to be labeled. The food may be manufactured on the premises. You may not be getting it from another place. Or some restaurants and food service operations have an off-site kitchen that prepares food for several locations, and then it gets shipped to the individual service restaurants. And that's usually owned by the same person. So anybody familiar with Spars in this area? Okay, there's a lot of Spars restaurants around. There's one in downtown Thibodeau. I think there's the one in Homa and over in Des Allemands. And they have a couple other properties that are not called Spars. Everybody know where the Malton Burger is on Canal Boulevard? That's where Spars owns that business, but they also have a kitchen there where they can prepare food for their other restaurants, and they do that. Okay. If we are transporting food to serve it off-site, so sometimes when we had fundraisers, we would go over to the student union, to the ballroom, and serve food over there. We used to go down to the Civic Center in Homa. We still very often go to people's homes and prepare food for them. When you're transporting that food, you have to use insulated food grade containers that are designed to keep food from mixing and contaminating each other, and also from leaking and spilling. So this this box is called a Cambro. That's the name of the manufacturer of the box. It's like a big thermos, and it's designed to hold hotel pans of food and keep them warm or keep them cold. So when you're sending the food offsite, it has to be labeled with the date, time, reheating and serving instructions. Those individual containers need to be cleaned and sanitized. The vehicle that you use to transport the food has to be cleaned on a regular basis. And then you have to have a thermometer to check the temperature of the individual foods. You also have to practice good personal hygiene. You're going to need to be sure that wherever you are doing this, you have access to hot and cold running water so that you can wash your hands and equipment. You have to check the food temperatures, make sure that the food is going to stay hot or cold for the proper length of time. Meat, poultry, seafood has to be separated from ready-to-eat items, so you have those stored in different Cambros. When you're catering, make sure the service site has the correct utilities, so safe water is definitely one of those things. You need garbage containers that are stored away from food prep, storage, and serving areas. So over here, just down the next road, they have a big musical festival called the Acadian Music Fest. And they have a lot of food vendors there with tents and trailers and all the kind of things. But they do provide trash cans that are away from your individual tent areas, as well as the porta potties and then a hand washing station. Use insulated containers to hold TCS food, wrap raw meat and store it on ice when you're packing it up to take it out. Deliver dairy products in a refrigerated vehicle or on ice. If at all possible, serve cold food in containers that are on ice or in chilled containers. So typically what you do is you take a large bowl and you put ice and some water in it, and then your serving bowl will go inside that, and that will help keep the cold food cold for a longer period of time. Always, we said this a number of times, store your ready-to-eat food separately from the raw food, and then provide customers with directions for handling leftovers. So if they're going from booth to booth, they'll probably buy more food than they're going to be able to eat in the time that they're there. So they will have to know what they can do with their leftovers. Temporary units. Construct temporary units to keep out dirt and pests. Apply food safety rules to the food prep. Most of the time, they're going to ask you to prep it in a commissary kitchen and then transport it to the temporary site. Make sure that safe water is available, and use disposable single-use items. You don't want to have to deal with real plates and utensils that people are going to have to return to you, because that's going to be a lot of items that are contaminated, and you could easily cross-contaminate. If you have a mobile equipment, like a food truck, sanitary requirements may vary based on the product. So depending on what you have that you're serving out of this vehicle, the requirements are going to be different. The same food safety rules apply to permanent and mobile kitchens. So you might have a food truck that just sits on your property and people come to it, or you may have one that you drive around to different locations. And it's likely that you would need a special permit or license to be able to operate a food truck. And who would you get that from? Did you get it from the FDA or the CDC? Pardon me? Your local regulatory authority. So it's your local health department that is going to give you approval to operate that kind of thing. Keep vended food safe. Has anybody ever seen sandwiches in a vending machine? Okay. Pardon me?
In the grid.
In the grid. Okay. So when you do this type of thing with TCS food, you've got to check your stock on a daily basis. Make sure that it doesn't pass its expiration date. It has to be kept at the correct temperature. So if you have deli sandwiches in a vending machine, got to be 41 degrees or lower. Dispense TCS food in its original container. So if you've got like containers of yogurt or little individual containers, but you're also sending out like granola to go with the yogurt containers, you can't open up your container and mix the yogurt with something else and putting it in another container and send it out. It's all going to stay in its original containers. Wash and wrap fresh fruit with edible peels before putting it in the machine. So definitely things like grapes, cherries, any kind of berries, strawberries, blueberries. Those would need to be washed, wrapped in plastic. Things like bananas and oranges would not. That's the end of chapter 7. So any questions on that? Okay, make sure you email me if you're having any problems getting the quizzes completed. I sent out the due dates multiple times. I haven't had a chance this morning to see how everyone's done.